Zara's violet eyes sparkled with contentment as she watched Marcus prepare breakfast in their small kitchen aboard the merchant vessel Stellar Harmony. His movements were precise yet gentle, a trait she had always admired about her human husband. After 3 years of marriage, she still marveled at how different he was from the tales other species told about humans. The Kalari woman adjusted her crystalline skin patches that shifted from deep purple to soft lavender when she was happy. Marcus noticed immediately, as he always did, and smiled that warm smile that had captured her heart on the trading station where they first met. "You're glowing again," he said softly, setting down a plate of her favorite Andromedan fruit beside her morning tea. "Good dreams?" Zara nodded, her pointed ears twitching with amusement. "I dreamed we found that perfect planet we've been looking for, somewhere quiet where we can settle down and start that garden you keep talking about." Marcus sat beside her, his calloused hands gentle as they brushed a strand of her silver hair behind her ear. These were not the hands of a warrior, she thought. They were the hands of someone who had spent years tending to plants in the ship's small hydroponics bay. Someone who read poetry in the evenings and spoke 7 different languages fluently. The other merchants they encountered often seemed surprised by Marcus. Where they expected the legendary human aggression and unpredictability, they found a soft-spoken scholar who preferred negotiating trade deals over drinks rather than through intimidation. Zara had heard the stories, of course. Every species in the galaxy had heard about human military prowess, their seemingly insane bravery in battle, and their refusal to surrender even in hopeless situations. But those stories felt like ancient myths when she looked at Marcus. He was the gentlest being she had ever known. When they had encountered a group of wounded Thraxian refugees whose ship had been attacked by pirates, Marcus had insisted they take them aboard despite the risk and expense. He had personally tended to their injuries and used his own savings to help them reach safety. "The Kepler system has some promising worlds," Marcus said, consulting his datapad. "We could reach it in about 2 weeks if we take the freight contract to Epsilon Station." Zara leaned against his shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. Human hearts, she had learned, beat much faster than Kalari hearts, but somehow his always seemed to slow when she was near, as if her presence calmed something restless within him. Their peaceful morning was interrupted by the ship's communication system crackling to life. Captain Vorth's gravelly, draconian voice filled the air with obvious stress. "All crew to stations. We've got multiple ships approaching fast. Configuration suggests raider vessels." Zara felt her skin patches shift to a worried orange. Space raiders were notorious for their brutality. They took what they wanted and left wreckage behind. The Stellar Harmony was a merchant vessel with minimal weapons and shields. Against a raider pack, they would be helpless. Marcus stood slowly, his expression unreadable. "Stay here," he said quietly. "Marcus, where are you going?" "Captain Vorth said all crew to stations. You should be helping with the engines." He paused at the doorway, and for just a moment, Zara caught something strange in his brown eyes. Something she had never seen before. It was there and gone so quickly she almost convinced herself she had imagined it. "I'll be right back," he said, and his voice carried a tone she didn't recognize. Alone in their quarters, Zara could hear the crew running through the corridors outside. The ship's engines changed pitch as Captain Vorth tried evasive maneuvers, but the raiders were gaining fast. Through the small porthole, she could see the sleek, predatory shapes of their attackers growing larger. The first impact shook the entire ship. Emergency lights bathed everything in red as the raiders' weapons found their mark. Zara gripped the edge of their small table as another blast rocked the vessel. She could hear shouting in the corridors and the unmistakable sound of the raiders cutting through the hull. Where was Marcus? Why wasn't he back yet? The lights went out completely, and in the darkness, Zara heard something that chilled her to her core. It was a sound she had never heard before, but somehow recognized on an instinctual level. It was the sound of something predatory awakening. Emergency power restored minimal lighting just as the raiders breached the main corridor. Zara could hear their heavy footsteps and harsh laughter as they moved through the ship. She pressed herself against the wall of their quarters, hoping they would pass by. Instead, she heard something else. The sound of a single person moving through the corridor. But these footsteps were different. They were measured, purposeful, and completely silent between steps. Then came other sounds that made no sense to her. Wet sounds, sounds of impact, and beneath it all, something that might have been whimpering. The ship's internal communications system sparked back to life, but instead of Captain Vorth's voice, a harsh raider accent filled the air. "Merchant vessel, you will surrender all cargo and passengers immediately. Any resistance will result in the complete destruction of your ship." The voice was cut off mid-sentence by a sound that made Zara's blood freeze. It was a scream, but not a scream of fear or pain. It was a scream of absolute terror, the sound of someone encountering something far beyond their worst nightmares. Then silence. Zara waited in the darkness, her heart pounding so hard she was sure it could be heard throughout the ship. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, she heard those familiar footsteps returning. The door to their quarters opened, and Marcus stepped inside. He looked exactly the same as when he had left. His clothes were clean, his breathing steady, his expression calm. But something was different. Something fundamental had changed, though Zara couldn't put her finger on what it was. "It's over," he said simply. "The raiders won't be bothering anyone anymore." "What happened? How did Captain Vorth drive them off? Did the military arrive?" Marcus sat down beside her, taking her hands in his. Those gentle hands that had never hurt anyone, that grew flowers and prepared her favorite meals. "The raiders encountered an unexpected problem," he said. "They made the mistake of threatening something I care about." There was something in his voice now, something ancient and dangerous that made the air in the room feel different. Zara found herself studying his face as if seeing it for the first time. Those kind brown eyes seemed deeper now, holding shadows she had never noticed. "Marcus, what aren't you telling me?" He was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was soft but carried the weight of truth. "I've spent so long trying to be the person you see when you look at me. The gentle human, the peaceful scholar, the man who wouldn't hurt a fly. And it's not entirely a lie. I am that person, especially with the next few days passed in strange silence." Captain Vorth had contacted the authorities about the disabled raider vessels, claiming mechanical failures had left them adrift. No one questioned the story. Raider ships were notoriously unreliable, and their crews often abandoned damaged vessels rather than attempt repairs. Zara found herself watching Marcus with new eyes. He continued his usual routines, tending the hydroponics bay, preparing meals, reading his poetry in the evenings. But now she noticed things she had missed before, the way his eyes tracked movement, even when he seemed focused on something else. How he always positioned himself between her and any potential threat, even unconsciously. The fact that despite being married for 3 years, she had never seen him truly sleep. She caught him in the observation deck during the ship's night cycle, staring out at the stars. In the reflected light of distant suns, his profile looked different somehow. More angular, predatory. When he sensed her presence and turned, that familiar gentle smile returned, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was seeing a mask slide back into place. "Can't sleep?" she asked, joining him at the viewing port. "Just thinking." He wrapped an arm around her, and she noted how carefully he controlled his strength. Had he always been that careful? About that planet we talked about. Maybe somewhere far from the shipping lanes. Marcus, what happened on the raider ships? Really? His arm tensed slightly around her shoulders. You don't want to know. I think I do. I'm not a child, and I'm not some fragile flower that needs protection from truth. Marcus was quiet for so long that Zara began to think he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was distant, as if he was recalling something from a dream. Do you know what humans were like before we reached the stars? Before we learned to control ourselves? You had wars, Zara said. Most species do during their development. Not just wars, we perfected the art of violence in ways that would make a Saurian death cultist weep. We turned killing into science, into art, into entertainment. We were so good at destroying each other that we nearly wiped ourselves out half a dozen times. He paused, watching a distant nebula pulse with ethereal light. When we finally reached space and met other species, we realized something important. Everyone else had evolved past their violent phases gradually, naturally. They became civilized through social evolution. Humans didn't. We became civilized through sheer force of will and the absolute terror of what we would become if we didn't. Zara felt her skin patches shifting to worried blues and grays. What are you saying? I'm saying that every human you've ever met, every peaceful trader, every diplomat, every scholar, is making a conscious choice every single day to be civilized. The violence didn't go away, Zara. We just learned to bury it so deep that most of the time we forget it's there ourselves. Marcus turned to face her fully, and in the starlight, his eyes held depths she was only beginning to understand. The raiders made a mistake. They threatened my family, my wife. And when that happened, 3 billion years of human evolution got pushed aside by something much older and much more fundamental. Show me, Zara said quietly. What? Show me what you really are. I need to see it. I need to understand who I married. Marcus shook his head immediately. Absolutely not. Why? Because you think it will scare me away? Marcus, I've loved you for 3 years. I'm not going anywhere. But I can't live with only knowing half of my husband. You don't understand what you're asking. Then help me understand. The argument that followed was unlike any they had ever had. Zara accused him of treating her like a child, of building their entire relationship on a lie. Marcus insisted he was protecting her, that some things were better left buried. Both of them said things they immediately regretted, and by the time it was over, they were sleeping in separate quarters. The next morning brought a distress signal from a civilian transport that had suffered engine failure in an asteroid field. Captain Vorth, being the decent sort despite his gruff exterior, immediately changed course to assist. What they found was not a simple rescue situation. The transport ship, Hope's End, was caught in the gravitational field of a massive asteroid, slowly being pulled toward its surface. But the real problem became apparent when they got closer. The ship had been deliberately sabotaged. This wasn't mechanical failure, it was a trap. Slavers, Captain Vorth spat over the intercom. They disable civilian ships and harvest the passengers. Crew to emergency stations, we're getting out of here before they... His words were cut off as the stellar harmony shuddered under weapons fire. Emerging from the asteroid field's shadows came 3 heavily armed slaver vessels, their hulls decorated with the trophies of previous victims. "Merchant vessel, prepare to be boarded," came the transmission. "Resist, and we will space your entire crew." Captain Vorth's voice crackled over the internal communications. "All hands, this is it. We can't outrun them and we can't outfight them. Prepare for boarding procedures." Zara felt her world tilting. Slavers were worse than raiders. Raiders killed quickly and moved on. Slavers took their time, and death was often a mercy they rarely granted. She found Marcus in the corridor outside their quarters. He was standing perfectly still, head tilted slightly, as if listening to something only he could hear. When he looked at her, she saw that the mask was gone entirely. This was not the gentle scholar she had married. This was something primal and deadly, a predator that had learned to wear civilization like clothing, but never forgot what it truly was. His brown eyes had gone cold and calculating, and when he spoke, his voice carried an authority that made the air itself seem dangerous. "Zara, I need you to go to the emergency shelter near the engine room. Take the other civilians with you. Lock the door and don't come out until I come to get you personally." "Marcus, this is not a discussion. What's about to happen you cannot see. Do you understand me?" The slavers were already cutting through the hull. She could hear their equipment working, their voices as they prepared to board. In movies, this was where the heroes made their brave stand and somehow won against impossible odds. In reality, this was where everyone died slowly and horribly, except that reality didn't account for humans. "I love you," Marcus said, and kissed her forehead. "Remember that, no matter what you hear." Then he walked toward the sound of the boarding party, and Zara finally understood what the galaxy had been whispering about all these years. Humans weren't just another species that had reached When the emergency shelter doors finally opened, Marcus stood in the corridor looking exactly as he always had. Clean clothes, gentle expression, those kind brown eyes that had first captured her heart. But Zara was no longer the same woman who had married him 3 years ago. She had heard too much, understood too much, to ever see him the same way again. The rescued civilians from the transport ship were safe aboard the Stellar Harmony, their injuries being treated in the medical bay. The slaver vessels drifted empty in space, their crews simply gone. Captain Vorth had contacted the authorities and reported another case of mechanical failures and crew abandonment, a story that was becoming disturbingly common in this sector of space. "The survivors want to thank their rescuer," Captain Vorth told Marcus later. "I told them it was a group effort, but they insist someone fought off the slavers directly. Tell them we scared the slavers off with false signals about military reinforcements," Marcus replied calmly. "They don't need to know anything else." But Zara knew. She had seen the way the other crew members looked at Marcus now. Not with fear, exactly, but with a new kind of respect that bordered on wariness. They understood something fundamental had shifted, even if they couldn't put words to it. That night, as they traveled toward the nearest station to deliver the rescued civilians, Zara finally confronted the truth of her situation. "You've done this before," she said, as Marcus joined her in the observation deck. It wasn't a question. He nodded slowly. "A few times. Before I met you, and obviously twice since then." "How many people have you killed?" "More than you want to know about. Fewer than probably deserved it." Marcus sat beside her, maintaining the careful distance that had developed between them since the slaver incident. "I never wanted you to see this side of humanity. I thought maybe if I could just be the man you fell in love with, I could bury the rest permanently." "But you can't, can you? It's not something you can just turn off." "No," he admitted. "It's like being an alcoholic, except instead of avoiding bars, I have to avoid situations where predators threaten innocent people. Because when that happens, something wakes up inside me that remembers when humans were the apex predator on a world full of monsters." Zara watched his reflection in the viewing port. "Tell me about Earth." "You wouldn't like it," Marcus said with a sad smile. "It's a beautiful world, but it's also a world that tried to kill humanity every single day for millions of years. Ice ages, volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, predators that hunted us for food. Most species evolved on worlds that were merely challenging. Earth was actively hostile." He gestured toward the peaceful stars outside. "Out here, you have raiders and slavers and pirates, but they're rational threats. They want something from you. Cargo, slaves, territory. They can be negotiated with or avoided. Earth's threats weren't rational. A storm doesn't want anything from you except your death. A predator doesn't care about your feelings or your family. It just wants to eat you. So humans learned to be worse than the things that hunted them. We learned to be more ruthless than anything else in existence, yes. But more importantly, we learned to do it while still maintaining our compassion for those who deserved it. Marcus turned to face her directly. Do you know what I was thinking about while I dealt with the slavers? Zara shook her head. I was thinking about the little Andromedan girl on the transport. She couldn't have been more than 10 years old, and she was crying for her mother when we brought them aboard. I was thinking about what the slavers would have done to her. His voice remained gentle, but his eyes held that ancient darkness again. I was thinking about you, and how they might have decided to take you too if they had seen you. And I was thinking about every other innocent person in this galaxy who goes to sleep at night, not knowing that there are humans like me scattered throughout space, making sure the monsters don't win. There are more of you. Not many. Most humans really are as gentle as you thought I was. But there are enough of us. Enough to make sure that when someone preys on the innocent, they eventually encounter something that will remind them why evolution gave humans forward-facing eyes and canine teeth. Zara was quiet for a long time, processing everything she had learned. Finally, she asked the question that had been weighing on her heart. When you look at me, do you see prey? Marcus's expression shifted to genuine surprise, then something that might have been pain. Zara, no. Never. When I look at you, I see the reason I learned to control what I am instead of letting it control me. Then show me, she said again, as she had nights before. I need to see all of you. Not the monster, but not the mask either. Show me the real Marcus. This time, he didn't argue. Slowly, carefully, he let the civilized facade slip away. It was subtle at first, just a change in posture, a different way of breathing. But gradually, Zara began to see the predator that lived beneath the scholar's exterior. It was terrifying, not because he looked different, but because he suddenly looked like exactly what he was, something that had survived on a world where survival meant becoming the most dangerous thing in existence. She could see it in the way he moved, fluid and perfectly controlled, in the way his eyes tracked every shadow and reflection, in the absolute stillness that spoke of a predator conserving energy before a strike. But beneath the terror, she felt something else. Safety. Because this terrifying thing loved her. This apex predator had chosen to spend its existence protecting her and others like her. Now I understand, she whispered. Understand what? Why you offered me peace instead of conquest when we first met. Why every human I've ever encountered has been so careful to be gentle with the rest of us. Marcus smiled, and for the first time since the slaver attack, it reached his eyes. Because the galaxy is full of sheep and wolves and a few creatures that learned long ago that the best way to keep the wolves from destroying everything beautiful is to become something that makes wolves extinct. And which are you? I'm whatever I need to be to keep you safe. Zara reached out and took his hand, those careful, gentle hands that could create and destroy with equal skill. Then I guess it's time I learned how to live with all of you, not just the parts you thought I could handle. They sat together in the starlight, and for the first time since the raider attack, the distance between them began to close. Zara was learning to love a human, not despite what he was, but because of it. And Marcus was learning that maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to carry the burden of being humanity's secret guardian alone. Outside, the stars continued their eternal dance, unaware that in a small merchant vessel, a woman was discovering why the galaxy whispered stories about humans in the dark. Not because they were monsters, but because they were the only thing standing between civilization and the monsters that would consume it. The rescued civilians would go on to live full lives, never knowing how close they had come to a fate worse than death. The slavers' empty ships would serve as warnings to others of their kind. And somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, other gentle humans continued their quiet watch, making sure the galaxy remained a place where love stories could exist. Because that's what humans did. They carried the darkness so others could live in the light. In the end, that was the most human thing of all. Stars. They were something else entirely. Something that had clawed its way up from a world where everything tried to kill everything else, where survival meant becoming the most dangerous thing in any room. As she ran toward the emergency shelter, gathering the few civilians aboard, Zara could hear the slavers breaking through. Their voices were confident, cruel, anticipating easy prey. Then the screaming started. But it wasn't the crew screaming. It was the slavers. And in the midst of those sounds of terror and disbelief, she heard something that would haunt her dreams. She heard Marcus humming. Softly, casually, as if he were back in their kitchen preparing breakfast. By the time the sound stopped, Zara finally understood why humans were the only species to ever win a war and then offer their enemies peace instead of extinction. It wasn't mercy. It was a warning. But that's not all I am. Zara felt her skin patches shifting through confused colors. I don't understand. You know the stories about humans, the ones you dismissed as exaggerations or myths. They're not myths, Zara. We are exactly what the galaxy fears we are. We just learned a long time ago that sometimes it's better to let people forget. The ship's lights fully restored themselves, and in the bright illumination, Zara could see that Marcus's clothes weren't as clean as she had thought. There were small stains that could have been anything, but her newly awakened instincts told her exactly what they were. What did you do to the raiders? Marcus stood and walked to the porthole. Outside, the raider ships were drifting dark and silent in space. I reminded them why humans became the only species to ever successfully negotiate a peace treaty after winning a war.